to the capitulation all the time. I was surprised to see that it was such an important issue in 1930s and 40s Turkey. The capitulations are really described as a crime, as a great injustice and a crime to which Turkey had been subjected by the West. Apparently in the Republic of the 30s, the capitulations were still a very emotive issue. But this, in a sense, is not... Yeah, I was surprised, but maybe I shouldn't have been, because Turkey only regained its full economic independence in 1929. It's only then that the last privileges of the European states are abolished. So that's recent. Now, one issue that comes to the fore a lot, all the time, in fact, is the building of the new Ankara. Now, Ankara held a very special place for the Kemalists. Of course, they had moved their capital from the ancient imperial capital, Istanbul, which, after all, at that time had been an imperial capital for 1600 years, first Byzantine, then Ottoman. And they moved it to a provincial backwater, and to the small town of Ankara, 30,000 inhabitants in 1920. So that was a revolutionary move, to move the capital away from Istanbul. So it's important to them. And it's important also as a showcase of the new regime. The journal is full of references to the building of the new capital. And that was a huge undertaking. There were many years when the building of the new Ankara took up 20 to 25% of the state budget. So it was enormous. The series Ankara Construit, Ankara Builds, is a long one that comes back in almost every single issue of the journal. And it shows the work being done on the new government buildings, the residences, the schools, and the institutes. In other parts of the journal, there are also many separate articles on the building activity, on the sports stadium, the race course with its remarkable stable buildings in half-timbered English Tudor style. That's very interesting. The commercial college, the exhibition palace, etc., etc. The overall impression conveyed by this building boom, most of which took place in the framework of Herman Janssen's master plan for the new capital, which was originally drawn up in 1928. The overwhelming impression is one of rationality. And it fits perfectly that element in the conceptualization of modernity that the Kemalists had. It had to be science-based, it had to be industrial, it had to be rational. Where until the late 20s, the so-called First National School of Architecture had dominated in Turkey, which references the Ottoman past, which uses, even in modern buildings like post offices and hotels and museums, uses elements from the Ottoman past and reinterprets them. This architecture of the 30s and 40s does not. It is functionalism and rationality of the modernist school, and when you look at it, you have an impression that it's particularly strongly influenced by Italy. Now you can see that here. This is obviously a drawing. I draw your attention to the contrasting picture here in the lower right-hand corner, which is a picture of the old citadel of Ankara. Now, Ankara is a very old town, indeed a Hittite settlement, and it has right in the middle of Ankara there's a rocky outcrop, and that has been a fortification ever since, really. In the Byzantine times and Ottoman times, Greek-Roman times. still there, but it's used here, of course. It's fairly derelict, as you see. Now it's much improved, but at the time it's very derelict, ruinous, and it's used to contrast this image of the ideal, modern, rational buildings of Agra. One more. Here you see the industrial buildings being highlighted. So, rationalist, inspired by Bauhaus and by the Italian fascist architecture of the day. At the end of the 30s, this starts to change, and the monumentalism of Hitler's Third Reich starts to have an impact. And then the buildings change, and they become more massive, more designed to impress, less completely rational, less open also. But that's a development in the late 30s and 40s. The modernist, functionalist, and rationalist inspiration of the Ankara building program clearly comes out in all of these pictures and articles. And again, of course, it links very easily to this idea of positivism, rationalism, scientism. History plays a surprisingly large part in the journal. That was another surprise for me, because the image we usually have is that the Republic turned its back on the Ottoman Empire, and that in fact the rhetoric of the early Republic was to completely reject the Ottoman heritage. Well, that has to be nuanced a little bit. The very first article of the first issue of the journal is a discussion of, and I quote, new research on Turkish history by the Minister of Education, no less, Reşit Galip. It was intended as the first installment of a long series, but Reşit Galip soon after died, and that prevented this from happening. Even so, the drift of the historical argument he's setting out is clear enough. The Ottoman Empire is not disregarded or disowned. Indeed, many issues of the journal have full-color reproductions of Ottoman art. But it is embedded in a much larger Turkish history, in which includes both the ancient Near East and Central Asia. Now this is a very important issue, of course, in the Republic of the 1930s and 40s. As in many new nation states with nationalist regimes, history was instrumentalized, was used to build the nation. And for that, a new history had to be designed. A history which did not disown the Ottoman Empire, but claimed much older roots for the Turks. And the Turks, Central Asian history from very old periods actually, is incorporated in this historical story. And as part of it, the Turks are also depicted as white. Very important, both by using anthropological and linguistic and archaeological data. An conscious effort is made to turn the Turks into part of the white race. And this is important because at the time, we're talking early 20th century, at the time it is extremely important to position yourself in the hierarchy of races in the world. This is still the time of colonialism. And this is still the time when late 19th century writers like the Comte de Gobineau in France and Gustave Le Bon, who have theorized racism, who have invented theories of race that became extremely authoritative, that were believed by everybody, are so influential, and they are not innocent, and we would now regard them as crackpot theories and nonsensical theories. But colonial rule was in part legitimized by reference to these racial theories. So it was of great importance for your hierarchy in the world and for your claims to independence to be on the right side of this racial divide. So that is a reason why this new history, and going back to Central Asia and redefining the Turks, as it were, is so important. Where recent history is concerned, the late Ottoman period, World War I, the national struggle, it is completely absent. Recent history is absent in the pages of the journal, while ancient history, the distant past, is celebrated. Almost every section on Turkey ends with that famous Turkey, land of sun, beauty and history, containing pictures of Seljuk and Ottoman monuments, but also ancient Greek and Roman monuments. Most attention is devoted to the program of archaeological excavations in Anatolia that were uncovering the past of Anatolia from the Neolithicum. So from the very beginnings of human civilization up to the Hittite civilization. That was very important in 1930s Turkey and also strongly supported by the state. And for a very good reason. And because uncovering these ancient remains and at the same time claiming them as part of Turkish history, redefining the Hittites as proto-Turks, gave Turks and Turkey a claim to the area and the geographical area of Anatolia older than anyone else. Older than Greeks, older than Armenians, older than Kurds or Arabs. In 1937, a whole special issue is devoted to the Second Turkish Historical Congress. There too, the accent is very much on the archaeological finds and reconstruction of the earliest history of Anatolia. This history is, of course, claimed as Turkish, and sometimes the history is also linked to contemporary developments, as in an article on policing. An article on policing in Turkey, in which it is argued that policing historically has ancient roots among the Turks, that basically no people have ever been as good as policing as the Turks ever since, their origins in Central Asia. And this is paralleled by something that you don't find so much in the journal, but which is very important in Kemalist Turkey anyway, and this is the doctrine that the Turks are a military people. The idea that the Turks historically have always distinguished themselves by their martial qualities, their qualities as soldiers, culminating in the slogan, "Every Turk is born a soldier." As I mentioned before, almost every issue of the journal contains a section titled Turkey, Land of Sun, Beauty and History. And these sections consist of a series of photographs with captions showing natural beauty, historic sites and monuments. Almost without exception, the pictures are empty. They are devoid of people. The monuments of Istanbul are shown in serene settings, often at twilight, without any suggestion of the hustle and bustle of the big city. This is also true for photo specials about things like the Anatolian house or Izmir and surroundings. Where there are persons in the pictures, they are clearly posing, often in picturesque traditional dresses. And this is also an important point. We're talking about modernity here. Modernity. But at the same time, this modern nation state emphasizes a clearly historical and folkloristic element like folk dress and also folk music. And so how does that work? Why have people in traditional dress pose and depict them in a journal that is so clearly designed to give the modern image of Turkey? And the answer is that Turkey was not only a modernist state, a modernist regime, but also a very nationalist one. And that it tried to balance the adoption of this contemporary Western civilization with an emphasis on national culture. And very important in that national culture is a kind of is a great regard for folklore, but a folklore that has been sanitized and Turkified. A folklore that can be made part of the Turkish national narrative. And that, of course, in a country as so multi-ethnic as Turkey is a problem. Kurdish dances are no longer Kurdish dances. They're Turkish dances, folk dances. Laz dances are no longer Laz dances, they're Black Sea dances. And so forth. There's quite a bit of portrait photography in the page of the journal, primarily in the series Faces of Turkey. But these pictures of young, vigorous and healthy Turks too are clearly posed. To a surprising extent, daily life and the people who lived in it are absent in the pages of the Turkish Kemalists. And that is not without reason, I would argue. But I'll come to that. In the late 30s, over 80% of the Turks, the population of Turkey, lived in villages. But when village life is discussed, it is not to describe the actual state of the real villages, but to describe the policies of the regime to create what is called the progressive village. And the progressive village is a village with an educated population where agriculture is combined with industry. That is a project of the Republic, and that is highlighted all the time. If the villages are invisible, so are the old towns. With the single exception of Ankara, whose citadel sometimes comes in for attention. The old urban centers of Anatolia, towns like Kayseri, Sivas, Konya, Erzurum, do not figure in the pages and in the photography of the journal. One might have expected the old town centers, or for that matter the villages, to have figured in, let's say, comparisons of old and new. This is the great new progressive village. Here is the old village. This is the new Ankara, or the new Izmir, the new Kayseri. Look, this is the old Ottoman. That doesn't happen. That does not happen, except for that example with the citadel